The first thing you might notice as I move around and interact with this world is that my hands are no longer just spheres. I made this very simple 3D model in Godot, just using some rectangles for fingers and the hand, and adding this circle hitbox collision area in the palm of the hand. They're not perfectly aligned with where my real life hands are, but for now they work, and they communicate whether your hand is open or closed and grabbing. The other thing that this does is you no longer collide with something to pick it up, you actually move your hand close to it and then close your hand to grab it, which works a lot better and is a lot more immersive. The hitboxes have also changed. No longer being circular, the hands are now rectangles, which does mean some collisions work a little bit differently, but all the underlying logic that I talked about last video still works the same. Another new thing that might stand out is this glowing blue box. I wanted to have the ability to reach over your right shoulder and grab an arrow out of the void behind your head, and doing this I was able to generalize this and make any area, say a cube over here, and have the ability to close your hand inside of it and spawn an item in your hand. So in this blue box you can close your hand and it spawns a cube just in your hand, and over your right shoulder you can do it and grab an arrow. I also put the same thing over your left shoulder to spawn a bow in your hand. Again, the model I just made in Godot, it's a very simple model, but maybe would like to make something better in the future. The code to get this working was surprisingly straightforward. While there is some code for detecting whether your hand is in the area or whether you should spawn the object in your hand or not, the actual code on the spawn area is pretty simple. Essentially, there's one line of code that loads in the packed scene, so the thing that you want to load into the player's hand, and there's one line of code that then instantiates it into the world, so it brings it into being. And that's about it. You can attach a script to an area 3D and pick whatever hitbox you'd like, whether it be a cube like I have here, or over your shoulder you have spheres. And then you can pick whatever scene you'd like to load in when the player closes their hand inside this area. Since last time, I also started testing this game on a Pico 4, and while most things just worked the same across both headsets, there were a couple differences I was running into. Previously, to test whether the player was opening or closing their hand, I used a quality called grip force on the Valve index. This didn't exist on the Pico 4, but instead there was something called grip. However, then later I noticed that the Valve index also had something called grip. So I've just switched over to, in both cases, testing the value of grip to tell whether the player was closing their hand. However, I don't know what grip force means. If grip works for both, then I couldn't work out what grip force does, and no matter how much Googling I did, I couldn't find an answer. If you know the answer, I'd love to know. The second thing that I ran into when using the Pico 4 is that when I would try to climb something that was climbable, holding one hand was fine, but as soon as I grabbed with both hands, the player would violently shake around, which I'm not going to show on video. It took me a while to work out why these two headsets were working so differently and why one was climbing perfectly fine and the other one was violently shaking the screen. And then almost by accident, I realized that I was doing some physics-based calculations inside the regular process function rather than the physics process function. Without getting into too much detail, the process function is a great place to take user input, but anything that relates to physics should be done in the physics process. That way a faster or slower frame rate isn't going to affect how things interact with each other. Inside the process function, I was grabbing the player's input, but in part of that I needed to work out whether the player was climbing or not, which I had a function for, but it was also grabbing and setting a bunch of values that would then be used in physics calculations. So all I did was move that function over to my fixed process and set a variable is climbing, and I use that variable inside my process function. Doing this makes both headsets now work the same. There is still one small difference between using the two headsets, and that is that the Valve Index likes to use the forward plus renderer, I believe it is, but the Pico 4 wants to use compatibility. This doesn't matter too much, the visuals look a little bit different, but otherwise it's the same. It's a little frustrating switching between the two of them, and it's additionally frustrating because the Pico 4 does work with forward plus if I trick my computer into doing it, but by default it throws up a warning and closes out the program. So I'm not sure how to get that working, but it's not the end of the world. One thing that I've started looking into now that I have added the bow and arrow being grabbable over your shoulder is having some default poses for grabbing items. Initially, I didn't want items to have a default grabbing spot. I wanted you to be able to grab an item from whichever part of it you wanted to grab from, freely rotate it around in your hands, and I felt like that would be important for testing out in this game. However, for certain items such as a bow and arrow, there is a very specific place I would like you to be able to grab from, and I worry that not having these default positions is going to make it inconsistent when you use a bow and arrow, and also just be a little bit frustrating if things are slightly rotated from how you want it to look. So each object now has a spawn offset property that you can set or just leave to the default 000, and when you grab inside a spawnable area, the item that spawns in your hand will be offset by this amount, and it differs depending on whether it's your left or your right hand. This allows me to hold the bow in the correct position and the arrow in the correct position by default and not have to adjust it between my hands to get it looking correct. This currently does not happen when you pick up the item off the ground, and I don't want it to always happen, but I plan on adding a sphere of influence that if you grab within that area on the object, it will automatically snap into your hand into the correct position. In the interest of keeping the scope of this game small, I'm not allowing objects to have multiple default grab positions, but you could easily add a list and multiple spheres of influence to have it snap to a bunch of different areas depending on where you grab it. There are still a few bugs that I'm trying to fix, but there are some that I've made some good progress on. The first is a trampoline-like situation that would occur when you lift yourself up with your hands. Sometimes it would launch you up into the sky, and then each time you land back down onto your arms, it would launch you back up into the sky over and over again. I was able to work out exactly why this was happening and kind of turn down the amount you would lift yourself up if you weren't actively climbing. However, I find if I turn this down too low, I wouldn't be able to use the zipline function where you hang from an object suspended on another object. So fine-tuning this is something I still need to do, but it's a lot less of a problem than it was before. I also recently added the ability to rotate with the right thumbstick, which is kind of a universal thing that's done in VR games. However, mine doesn't quite work right now. One, it rotates the entire play space, so if you have a big play area and you're standing on the edge of it, you move a lot when you rotate. And the other thing is when you're holding a two-handed object, that stops working so well once you rotate 90 degrees or so. So I need to find some way of actually rotating the player and everything associated with them rather than rotating the play space itself. Something I still haven't quite got down, but I'm sure it wouldn't be too bad to fix, surely. I want to end off talking about where I see this project going and what more I want to be working on it. The first thing I want to get working is the ability to combine the bow and arrow together into one bow and arrow object that you can then pull back and launch an arrow. I've been putting this off a little bit because it's a little bit complicated combining two objects like this, or at least with what I currently do for holding objects. But I think it's an important thing to try out and very important for the point of this game. After I get this working, then I want to be able to fire the arrow itself, and I need to work on the arrow physics, sticking into objects, that sort of thing. And once I have arrows working like that, I want to then add targets and or things for you to shoot. What point is shooting arrows if there's nothing to shoot at? Finally, and this is kind of the biggest scope thing that I want to do with this, is actually make a level and a world for you to play in. It doesn't necessarily have to be super polished or even that fun or fulfilling of a world, but I just want to make a play space for you to play in, not just a test world with a bunch of test items around, like this weird square over here. I want to actually make a world for you to play through and ideally have fun in. This is really pushing myself from where I normally exist, which is get things technically working. I actually want to finish making this, so that's going to be difficult for me, but that is one of my next steps. I am really trying to push myself with this project and learn skills that aren't easy to me. I've made a classic donut in Blender, and it really looks a whole lot better than everything else I've made in this game so far. It's not just a sphere or a rectangle. So just seeing how much of an impact having an actual 3D model, even a basic 3D model that even I could put together in a couple hours following a tutorial, even something as simple as that just makes a huge difference. And if I was able to apply that to a whole level or a bow or different objects you could pick up, I could really see this game being a lot more fun. Even if nothing else changed about it, it would just be more visually interesting. And I think there is an element in these VR games of having things that just like look and feel right. It doesn't have to necessarily be realistic, but it just has to look and feel right. And it makes it a lot more immersive and a lot more fun to play. Beyond just making 3D models, one thing that I want to learn in the process of making this game is how to import a 3D model from Blender, one that includes an animation, and actually make use of those animations in the Godot game engine. Right now, if I wanted to animate something, I would just manually move all those pieces one by one and attach it to a script and then play through those parts of the script. And while that's technically possible and how I internalize how I would do an animation, it's definitely not practical. It would waste a lot of time, and I would probably just burn out before I finished even one animation. So animation is something I want to push myself to learn in Blender, and also learn how to import that into Godot in a way that is usable in my scripts. So this is all treading new ground for me, but I am hoping to push myself with this project. And finally, I want to reiterate the purpose of me doing all this. It's really just to learn how making a VR game works, learn how OpenXR and Godot and all these different things work together, and also add into there. I'm hoping to learn some Blender in there, and really just get the skills to be able to make a VR game in general. This isn't necessarily going to be a big finished product, although I do hope to quote-unquote finish it, because that is also good practice to get in the game making process. It has been quite some time since the last video and not that much updates, but I've had a pretty busy few months of my life, so hopefully I can focus more time on this coming up. And once again, if anything more interesting happens, I will update with another video.